and welcome to another episode of FooBar. Today we are going to talk about Lambda Powertools for Typescript. Don't panic, if you're a JavaScript developer, don't panic, we have you covered, but you might need to listen this interview until the end. So in this interview we talk about what Powertools are, we show a demo, and we go over a lot of things that I know you will be asking. If you have any extra questions for me or for Sarah, you can reach out to her in her social media. Her contacts are in the description box, or leave them in a comment here and I will ask her, or I might answer myself. If there are any follow-up videos you would like, just let me know. And if you like this content, always like it. And let's get to the interview. So today we have a super special guest. She will be talking to us about the Lambda Powertools for Typescript. She's a solution architect in AWS, and her name is Sarah Herion. Herion, I'm very bad with surnames. How are you, Sarah?
I'm great, and I am very, very happy and excited to be here with you talking. So thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm super happy that you're here today. I've been following your content from quite a long time, and when the Typescript was announced, I was like, yes, I need her in my podcast. Now I have a reason to invite her.
Nice.
So yes, thank you for accepting. And let's dive deep into the topic right away, because my audience is very impatient. If we start talking, they don't like it. So let's talk about what is this library and why it was built in the beginning. What was the reason?
Yeah, so I will start with a more general context, and then I will dive deep into the library and what does the library solve. Let me start with a problem. So not a problem, but a challenge or a set of actions that customers and developers need to perform in production. So I wanna touch a bit on the well-architected framework from AWS, and in particular the serverless lens, which provides developers with a set of best practices related to different pillars, but in particular to operational excellence. And when we talk about the operational excellence pillar, we want to focus particularly on, among other things, on the ability to support developers and the opportunity for them to run these workloads that they own effectively and to gain insights into their operations. This is crucial for developers who operate workloads in production, and serverless developers included. And they need to be able, these developers, they need to be able to deliver business value fast with confidence. And they also need to have a shared understanding of the workload that they own and what is the expected behavior. So this might be a given, but it's not as easy as it might seem. So you need to have data points, you need to have information, context about your workload in order to be able to understand actions that you as a developer can take when there is a bug or a production issue, or simply something like related to performance improvements, and make sure that you accelerate what I would call your production readiness. But even after you're already in production, so continuously improve and feel confident about the workload that you own as a developer. So this is the context of the Lambda Powertools developed by AWS. And what does the Powertools do to support developers in that sense? So the Powertools are a suite of utilities for Lambda functions that, for instance, in the case of Typescript, are running in the Node.js runtime. And what these utilities do, they provide the structured login. They allow you to easily create custom metrics asynchronously. And they provide tracing out of the box in an easy way, and in an approach that, in a method that would allow you to reduce the amount of code that you would have to write as a developer. Because if you think about
I have to make a note here, because I have done videos on the free things that you mentioned, I have a video for each free before this Power Tools was announced for TypeScript. And people can go there and see how much work is to make the structure logs, to create alarms, and to do the tracing, because that's there. And now this is like the continuation on this, like, yes, this is how simple it is with Power Tools. So yes, there is code for all that. I have a whole repo on doing that manually, and I'm super happy that you're here to tell us about the Power Tools.
In fact, the idea is like we in the majority of our use cases, we always want to have some data points about our workloads. So instead of writing always the same code, we offloaded a bit of the operational burden from developers, and we implemented these libraries client-side in Lambda so that developers can focus even more on the business value. And I want to clarify one thing. So Power Tools is not only about monitoring. So I mentioned what are considered the core utilities, which is traces, metrics, and logs. But in reality, Power Tools, it's about also in general operational excellence. So TypeScript is just one of the languages that AWS has implemented so far. The other two libraries that are already available for developers are Python and Java. And Python was the first one developed by the principal Heitor Lessa. And
I have an interview with him. So if you're a Python developer, I leave you the link because
you cannot miss that one. You cannot miss that one.
No, he's great.
And so, for instance, the Python was created, I think, in mid 2020, so quite some time ago. And they have like 14 utilities that includes fetching parameters, idempotency, so all things that are common in serverless architectures, and they can help you reduce the operational burden. So this is what Power Tools tries to do to help out. Then maybe it's worth also mentioning kind of why did we go for TypeScript instead of JavaScript? Maybe that's maybe interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a good, valid question, because I think when many developers think about the Node environment and think of JavaScript, because that's what you have seen most of the Lambdas, but I think lately it has been changing a little bit.
Yeah, so I think that something that has been brought up to the attention of my attention, but also my colleagues within AWS, is that a lot of developers who ship code to the Node.js runtime in Lambda, they actually code in TypeScript. And then some people that are maybe listening or watching this might wonder why TypeScript instead of JavaScript, for instance. Well, I personally think that there are many benefits by using types. So for those who are not familiar, TypeScript essentially is a type language. The name is very suggestive. And type languages have the proven ability to improve, to enhance what is normally the code quality and especially the understandability of the code base. So TypeScript provides optional types, a type system over JavaScript for JavaScript. And also it includes all the features that JavaScript does not support yet. So it's very far in the timeline. So you're allowed to use all these fancy like experimental modules that you would not use, or features that you would not be able to use nowadays with JavaScript. But when it comes to benefits, I think that personally what I love about TypeScript is that it makes refactoring easier, in my opinion. And that's because you have this transpiler that transpiles TypeScript code into JavaScript. And having this transpiler capturing and flagging errors while you code, so not only when you deploy in production, but actually while you code, it allows you to fail fast and fail often, by the way. And
we fail a lot with
yes, there is a lot of, I think especially if you're new to TypeScript, there's gonna be some some like a learning curve. Like for me, I remember it was very difficult, especially I think TypeScript. It's a great language, but sometimes has these error messages that are obscure, and you're like, oh my God, what is means? But
What?
once you kind of get the language of this error, you're like, ah, that's good. And then you're
My
like,
problem
oh,
with
yeah.
TypeScript is that it's so similar to JavaScript that sometimes you end up writing JavaScript and then it fails in weird places and you look at it and it's like, I cannot see it. Oh, yeah, you need to pass the type there. It's like,
Yeah,
or
fair
you need
enough.
to define, like, and it's like so stupid because you're so familiar to see the JavaScript code that you forget that you're using a different language. It's like,
It's very similar. It's very similar. Another thing that I love about TypeScript is it's like a documentation. So I am personally a fan of documentation. First of all, because it allows not only the team, the AWS maintainer, the core maintainers of the project to understand all the things that other people implemented, other part of the team, but also the AWS community to make sure that people from developers from the community are able to understand how can they use the library and how can they contribute to it. And I think that types are a great form of documentation for code bases, sorry. So understanding how a function signature is a structure that really also increased my own confidence when I was a developer myself, owning these microservices in production. I think it increases the confidence.
definitely. And also now with CDK and SAM, it's possible to do TypeScript and it should not be a problem. Like there is documentation, so you can go there and see how it's possible to do it. So
Absolutely, absolutely. Now that you mention it, so especially because I think we realized that that a lot of these developers that were shipping Node.js Lambda functions, they were actually using TypeScript. Then there has been a number of enablement resources that we launched recently as part of the AWS Lambda service team. One is we recently launched a dedicated AWS Lambda guide for TypeScript developers. So that's great because I think that clarifies would support people who approaches this for the first time or they struggle a bit about setting up or how does it work with Lambda and TypeScript and so on. Because it's slightly different than with JavaScript. And then, as you mentioned, some CLI support and the TypeScript support, CDK, of course. So I think this is just the beginning. I'm confident that this is going to be a positive trend.
it will be. So that's a reason why we have TypeScript and not JavaScript.
Yes. Yes.
And now we can jump maybe into seeing this library in action and
Yes.
going
Yes.
into the different bits and pieces.
Yes. So let me share my screen. Actually, first I will explain a bit what I will show you today. So I will show you a bit, maybe a bit of the code base for the Power Tools. By the way, AWS Lambda Power Tools for TypeScript is currently today at the time of this recording. We're very close to the release candidate. So get ready for it, or hopefully it's going to be live by the time that you will see this recording. But so I will show you actually a demo of an app that uses it. So I can show you how you can instrument your own code bases with it. So let me share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. So I created this serverless voting application. So it's a front end. It's a small app that has a front end side and a back end side, and it's built with serverless services. And it essentially allows you to vote some items. In this case, videos. So let me start. I am I log in with my identity provider, and let's say, imagine that here I am a solutions architect based in the Netherlands. So in this case, what I'm gonna be voting is football matches from Eredivisie, which is a football match league, sorry, a football league that is from the Netherlands. So imagine that this is an app that your company is developing, and I, as a user, I want to be able to say, oh, I disagree with this red card. I don't think that was a good idea. That was not, I don't agree with the referee. And then, yes, this was a yellow card and so on. So I have some sort of interaction with this app, like disagreement or agreement. So imagine this is your consumer, your API consumer, and I'm able, to perform some operation over this client, and which then interfaces with the backend. So what is the architecture behind it? So this is where the code base is hosted. So this is the repo, and this is the architecture behind it. So this is me, the user. Both the front end and the back end are behind a cloud front, like a CDN origin. And the front end, the static assets like the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are actually hosted on an Amazon S3 bucket, where the backend is powered by API Gateway, Lambda, and DynamoDB, which respectively are represent the RESTful API endpoints, then the compute that runs my Lambda and my code, my business logic, and then I have a couple of tables that are DynamoDB table, which are NoSQL, which is a NoSQL database. Some of you in the public might already be familiar with this, but I'm just clarifying in case you're not familiar, so that we are on the same page.
Yeah, I think if people are watching this channel, they have seen these three things together a lot.
Fair.
Because
That's true, but to be fair, I send a lot of people that are keen to, learn more about serverless or AWS to your channel. So sometimes maybe they are not familiar. So I don't give for granted.
That's good that you spend the time, but yeah, this is a combo.
Yes,
a very powerful combo.
Yes,
API Gateway, Lambda, and Dynamo.
True. So let me show you a bit the code base. So this was the demo. So the code base, I don't know if you can see my screen.
First, let's get the elephant out of the room. This doesn't look like anything I have ever shown in my chat.
Yes. Oh, I also see a typo. 1 second. Okay. Display. No, I have to keep the typo. I'm sorry because it's does not reference. Anyway, so that's a fair point. So this is not CDK. This is not SAM CLI. This is Terraform. Disclaimer. If you go to the AWS Lambda Powertools for Typescript repository, you will see an example folder. This example folder will contain self-contained deployable apps that leverage Powertools for TypeScript and that you can deploy. And we have examples in CDK, and we have examples in SAM that we recently added. And this that you see in my repository, it's an example in Terraform. So I've been using Terraform for quite some years. And before joining AWS, I used to use Terraform on a daily basis. So this is something that I enjoy using Terraform. And I do know that a lot of our developers also use Terraform. So I think it's I like the opportunity to make it to provide an example. But yeah, so this is a Terraform resource. So here, what I'm doing for the folks that are watching this that are not familiar with Terraform, essentially what I'm doing here, I am declaring how the Lambda function will be. So when I deploy it, so in here, I'm not going to go too deep into the Terraform side because I want to focus on the more Powertools related. But anyway, this is how my template for my blueprint for my Lambda function. the thing that I want to draw the attention in here is, so first of all, I have two Lambda functions. Let me see. So one that gets me all the videos that when I go to, if you remember my website, the website I show, I get all the videos. So I have one Lambda that queries the videos and performs a read operation on DynamoDB. And then I have another Lambda that actually submits the video, the vote. So I disagree or disagree. So I have two Lambda functions that do one job each.
Yeah.
And in here, I'm seeing the Lambda function that gets the video. So here I introduced the first way in which you can quote unquote bootstrap your settings for Lambda Powertools. So in here, so just as a recap, we have three utilities today for TypeScript. One is for logs, one is for metrics, and one is for traces. And in here, when I instrument the Lambda function within the code, there are different ways in which you can set up your configuration. One way to set it up is by using environment variables. So here I can set, for instance, Powertools service name, which in this case, I don't know if I can see it. In this case, it's, so this is a bunch of configuration that I'm doing. So you don't see the clear value, but it's something like, actually you will see in the console later, it's like serverless voting app, test, blah, 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 something like this.
And that's very useful for the structure logs, for example, when you need to create, and also for the metrics.
100%. So this is going to be used for understanding the context of all these data points that you're going to create when you instrument your Lambda function. So when you look at the logs, when you look at the metrics and the traces, you want to be able to say, okay, but which service is this? Because in reality, in most cases, in the same AWS account and in the same region, you have more Lambda functions relevant to different services.
One question, should it be like the name, for example, in this case, imagine your service is called, I don't know, vote, voting, whatever, serverless voting. Should the service name be the Lambda function or should be the kind of microservice level or higher level?
The thing is, I can tell you my preference and I can give you some reason why I do it like this. But at the end, I think that it depends on your environment. So I will give you an example on how it looks like. So for instance, here, this is how I name my Lambda function. So serverless voting app is the name of the service. Then you have test, which is the name of the environment, because ideally you would have one AWS account that has a unique environment, like for instance, test or production or dev or so on. But for the sake of this demo, I'm actually deploying multiple environments in the same account. So test is the environment. Use Central 1 is the region, because maybe, at least when I was a developer myself, we would do multi-region so you might have a different Lambda function or different resources that would clash if you don't specify the region. And then the get videos represent the actual identifier of the Lambda function. And then you have a random string that is created based on the combination of AWS account, AWS region, and the name of the service to be unique. So then this is also useful to have like unique S3 bucket names. And since I want to have a standard naming convention for all the AWS resources, this technique makes sure that this service, this Lambda function in this region, in this environment, will have a unique name that will not collide to all the other services that have different dimensions. And does it make sense?
Yes. So then the service name will be serverless voting app. test.
That's correct. That's correct.
Or not. Test or no
correct.
test.
I also like to tag. So I can't say
tag.
Yes. The tags are so important every time that I talk with developers and especially the customers that I work with. For the sake of the demo, it's not so important, but when you work in production, you want to be able to, especially for cost governance perspective, to understand which teams are allocated at like how much of the billing is the team affecting or a business division. So these are an example. These are not the tags that you must do, but this is an example of tags that you can add to your resources, all of them that support tags. So then you can have a better governance. And for instance, the GitHub repo is a tag that tells me which repository was this done, because sometimes you are, especially I remember when I was when I was a developer, we're like, who created this resource? Where does it come from? And sometimes you want to understand where was this created, ideally in infrastructure as code. So this allows you to understand.
To go back.
Yeah. An owner would be could be my name now because I created, but ideally it would be the name of the service. So I think we're going on a tangent in tagging. No, but I like
okay. I like this. It's always nice to ask this type of questions because it's something that comes often.
Yeah.
Like people don't know how to name things.
So recap. Tagging your resources is important, especially in the long term. You're gonna thank yourself for doing this. Okay, so going back to the environment variable. So in here, I defined the service name, which in this case was serverless voting app. Then in here, I defined the log level. So for those, I think most of the people who are watching, they know what a log level is, but essentially, long story short, a log level sets the behavior of your logger in different environments and tells your logger whether a certain log item will be printed in the standard output or not. So for instance, if you have log level worn, that means that all the log items that are either warn or error, which is a higher, it's a more critical level, then they will appear. But everything that is, for instance, info or debug will not be visible. This is very typical setup for a production environment, for instance. In production, you typically don't want to have like debug or info, which is more like what I will do, like for instance, I want to debug this event payload that the Lambda is ingesting. And the reason why the reason why it could be, it's better to sometimes to not do it is because, first of all, if you log everything on production, especially if you're an enterprise and you have a lot of requests, you are going to have so much data pollution. Imagine that you are a developer and you're waking, ideally not, but it can happen. You're on call, you wake up in the night and you're trying to search in these logs, what is going on? And you have 20 million logs that don't help you. They are all like things that, and you're like, oh my God, you have to find out what is the problem is. Like data pollution, it can slow down the time that you need to identify what's happening or the status of your service. Another reason to use a log level warn or error is cost savings, because you actually pay for the logs that you are storing. And you can kind of mitigate this by using a very specific log retention that is shorter. Yeah. But maybe you want to keep, like, let's say, a decent retention period. So you don't want to have you don't want your billing to go high because of your logs. I think there are better, more efficient ways to spend your money.
Definitely.
So even though logs are important, then you have sample rate, for example.
One question about the log level. Can you change it without redeploying the function, or that's something that if you change it, you need to redeploy?
So yes and no. Because why am I saying yes and no? Because potentially the only thing that you would need to do to let's say that there is something really happening in
Wrong, and you
production,
want to have the
something
most
fast.
verbose.
Today, the way Power Tools for TypeScript is implemented today, you could potentially change the log level in the console. I mean, it's not deploying, but it's a minimal change.
Yeah.
But I think a different way to do it is to use appconfig. So getting this environment, so getting this environment values not from the Lambda environment, but from an external service that you just change the value in there, and then the Lambda just refreshes. So you don't even have to deploy,
I have a whole video on that, so go and check it out on how to do feature flags with
exactly.
Lambda and appconfig. I have videos for everything. I'm like this grandmother.
It's like a graph. We have so many tangents. Anyway,
but I wanted to ask because this is something that always comes. So yeah, let's go with sample.
Absolutely. And then what else? So we have
sample rate.
Sample rate. So the sample rate. So you mentioned something. Let's say that I am in production and the log level that I have in production is error. So I see only errors. I remember when I was a developer and I was making making some releases, making some deployments, and then instinctually what you would do after you deploy is to go through the logs and see, is everything okay? Did I break something? I mean, it's not always so hopefully you would have more confidence about your code, but because you implement tests and two-end tests and so on, so I'm not gonna go on that tangent. But it's common that you feel like, okay, I want to see that the things are going as they should. So imagine that you go to your logs because you want to have the visual feedback that everything is okay. But then you don't see anything at all in your logs. And that's because there are two possibilities, actually. The first one is there is no error. So the logger that has log level error does not show any error. So that's a good thing. But then the lack of information makes you even question is that because of the logger or it's because everything is broken? I think that sometimes the lack of visual feedback, that even the things that are working are not. So you want to have the visual feedback about things that are working in your Lambda function, and that's where sample rate comes in, because sample rate allows you to log everything that is at the same level or above as your log level in that environment, but also it allows you for a very, very small percentage of invocations to log everything, all the logs that are part of a Lambda execution.
That's
so
good.
let's say that I put a log level 1%. In this case, the sample rate is a decimal value, so it would be 0.01. And that would be 1%. What that means is that, yes, I will log only all the errors, but 1 out of 100 Lambda function invocations will actually print all the logs. And that, especially at scale, especially in production, that will allow you to give that visual feedback and making sure that everything works I think increases confidence while still keeping the cost of logs down, which is also another important aspect for the long term.
But that happens sometimes with metrics, that if there is no nothing is being printed, then you don't know, is the metric working? Will something happen? So just this putting nothing in like the graph, like that visual confirmation is super important. So that's great that it's there.
Yeah. So enough with these environment variables. Let's go to actually where do I instantiate?
And what is the metric namespace? That's the last one.
Oh yeah, the metric namespace. It's like a group. I would say it's the container that will allow you to group the metrics that you create. An example of a metric namespace could be the name of your company. Like for instance, if you work at Octank, that could be your metrics namespace. But it's up to you to define what value gives you the best context about the metrics that you produce. This is just an example.
Good.
So let's start with the utilities, because I think there was let me show you some examples. So in here, so let's start with the logger, for instance. So in here, I instantiate the logger, which is one of the utilities. The logger allows you to create out-of-the-box log items that contain like structured log. And what I mean with structured logs are logs that are in the format of JSON. Why is the JSON format important? It's because this key value pair structure allows you to essentially query and slice and filter information data points. So that's important because the moment that you are troubleshooting something, you want to kind of like slice down the information to find what is relevant for your use case. Like for instance, that could be the service, based on the service, based on the environment, based on the function name, based on the team. It could be anything. So
and you can have some, for example, values that are across all your functions. I don't know, like order ID or something like that. So you put that in your structure logs and then you filter and you can see the order ID with problem and try to.
I love that you mentioned this because I want to bridge this sentence, this comment with the fact that this could be so useful, for instance, for SaaS companies. So imagine that you are a developer in a company that provides software for other companies, and you have different tenants, so different customers that have their own infrastructure. And imagine that you are this developer that tries to identify, okay, what's going on? What is the problem? Is how many tenants, how many of our customers is this impacting? And what is the customer? Is this related to one specific customer? So the idea, by using structured logging, you can add, for instance, a key value pair that define the tenant ID.
Yeah.
And you can use that information, you can add that context in the logger, in the metrics, in the tracer, and that really allows you. So this is just one example of important data points that you can utilize to then troubleshoot and to identify what's going on and understand the behavior of your service. So Logger, as I mentioned, provides create structured logs. It also gives you out of the box, if you wish, some useful context about your logs. That includes if the invocation was a cold start or not. It includes, for instance, the name of the Lambda function. It could be the AWS region if you want. So it's really useful because you don't have to set it up yourself. It also does out of the box. So yeah.
One question, you're in this file called powertools.typescript. So this is a file in your project.
Yes,
that
I
you
created
configure
this file. Yes, so that's a good question. So so this is a file that I use to essentially instantiate all the utilities, logger, metrics, and tracer. And then I will import, because this is like a shared code, I will then import this file in the two different,
Lambda
I will
functions.
import the exports of this file in the two Lambda functions because they are utilizing the same shared code. Yep, but that's a good point. Yeah. So in the case here, just to clarify what this is doing, for instance, that you can do. So there are some log items that contain information that, so let's say I want to log an event. The event that the Lambda that has triggered the Lambda. So when I create a log item and I log the event, I want the event to just be in that log item. But sometimes you have some attributes like key value pairs that you might want to have in all the log items that are generated from the logger. For instance, in this case, I personally set the AWS account ID, the environment name, in also the name of the logger, so logger and the version. An example of why this could be important is because maybe your code base or your company has different teams and they use different Lambda functions. You want to be able to understand in CloudWatch which library generated this log and pinpoint if there are errors. Oh, we just updated the, ideally not, but we just updated the Powertools and the new version as a different behavior and so on. So it's a good way to keep track of what you're using on production. It's an example. So then you have metrics. Metrics is a different data point that allows you to essentially it gives you an overview of the behavior of your system at a certain time and also historically, and also provides statistics out of it like percentile or the average behavior or the average data point or the minimum or maximum. So this is very good for mathematical operations
and for dashboards
and alerts. So
alerts, yes.
Yeah, so that's a good use case for sure. While Tracer, for instance, is the third utility, and it uses X-ray out behind the as a service for traces. And traces are especially interesting or useful in the context of distributed systems, because in reality, your code base, if you're working in production, you're rarely a standalone function or a standalone unit. You probably interact with different services within maybe owned by your team, different services or dependencies upstream or downstream that are owned by different teams, or even dependencies that are outside of the scope of your organization. And each connection, each communication between each component is called a segment. So the trace tells me the story about the whole flow of the user journey, if you will, or the transaction journey, whether the segment represents the connection between each component. And then you have the concept of subsegment, which is essentially slicing the business logic into different logical parts, or parts that are relevant for me, that I want to kind of like I want to have data points about, the latency of my query to DynamoDB, for instance, or the latency,
or to a third party, because that's sometimes
absolutely yes. So okay, so let's get to the actual code base. So for instance, here you can see that I want to draw the attention. So there is a lot going on in this file. So I would like to maybe draw the attention to what is more important, because there's a lot. So the first thing that I would like to add is that I am importing two functions in here. One is the inject lambda context, and one is capture lambda handler. So these functions are actually MIDI compatible middlewares. And for those, I think if you are a Node.js developer for Lambda, You probably already know Midi, but essentially Midi is an engine for middlewares within Lambda. So what Midi allows you to do, if you think about the execution of your code within Lambda or a Lambda invocation, it allows you to to perform operation before and after your code execute. But then you define this behavior within your code itself. And
Midi has been around before, I think, the Lambda extensions and
absolutely.
That you could play with that with the extensions API. So
shout out to the Midi core maintainers that are doing an amazing job for the community. Thanks for everything. And then, so I'm using this, and what it does essentially here, just by using Midi. So Midi is one way in which you can instrument your Lambda function. There are 3 ways in total. The more manual way, which is more verbose, so you explicitly use our library in a way that it's a more verbose method. It's documented in our documentation, but let's say that this is like the gist of it. Then you have Midi Middlewares, which with one line of code essentially allows you to capture, it's a wrapper around your Lambda handler, and allows you to, out of the box, create create segments and segments that tell you, okay, is this a cold start? What was the latency of the handler? What was the latency of my query to my table? What is the latency to the query to this external dependency? And this you can do with one line of code, and that's it. Like, if you think about the amount of lines of code that you would have to implement yourself without it, I think that's a lot of the benefit. Then you have the logger, the inject Lambda context, and essentially every logs that is outputted out of this logger instance, if you use the Midi middleware inject Lambda context, then you would have out of the box context information in form of key value pairs in every log item that you create without you having to worry about. So you have out of the box. So this is an example of how it would look like. So let's say that I have my Lambda handler. So I have my API gateway, and then I want to debug typical situation. I want to debug my event. And this is the Lambda that has been invoked. And I want to debug the event payload. And here I use details, but I can use data. This is entirely up to you. You can use FooBar, and so you are free to use whatever you want and to debug the information that you want. In this case, for instance...
So this will be the similar console log and print that event, but this is in a structured way.
Yes, in a structured way. Later I will show you how the log look like. So in here, for instance, another thing that developers would say, okay, I want to see how the video look like. Is the array empty? Do I get any data? What kind of data do I get? So this is very typical scenario. So I want to see what the video as array look like. And I want to log the error so for instance, another thing about logs is that normally good logs, so logs that are most helpful, provide a human readable sentence that helps me understanding what kind of data is this. Because if you write logger error, you don't understand what it is. In this case, providing it's better for your code base, and in terms of I would recommend using descriptive log description messages. Like for instance, here I see this is the get video Lambda function, and I know that here there is an error that occurred while querying the DynamoDB table, DynamoDB name, and I get also the log. So this is the get video, but let me show you the post video because I want to show you also the metrics. So sometimes, so I want to give an example of when custom metrics are important. So let's remember that by using AWS services that are serverless, you are relieved of the operational burden, which is related to in uh, getting monitoring information related to the infrastructure, the underlying infrastructure that power your services. When I say underlying infrastructure, I mean the AWS resources, resources like Lambda functions or API gateway. So this
Those emit metrics. You don't need to do
yes.
anything.
So out of the box, just by using Lambda functions or API gateway or DynamoDB, you have metrics, information that tell me something about the error rate or the invocation count or the number, like the query or something like this. And this is a given if you use like serverless services. But if you remember back in the days when we would have like a web server and then we would run containers, it would take so much effort, you know, to create all the observability and the monitoring and the like making sure that the emitting the data relevant for your application. Like it's not impossible, but it takes a lot of time and operational burden. So first of all, we already have metrics that tell me something about my system. We might, though, want to have custom metrics that tell me something that it's important for my business. So if you remember, the client was able to do, oh, I agree or disagree with this, you know, red card or yellow card and so on. Let's imagine that you're a developer. Your application works. There is no error in the metrics, the default metrics that you get. But something happens that out of the sudden you only get downvotes. Like you get 100% of your code creates downvotes. How do you capture this? This is such a weird. I tell you, it can happen. Like because we are humans, we make mistakes, and sometimes you want to kind of understand something that it's related to not like the health of the underlying infrastructure, but something that is related to the business logic. So in this
one thing I learned, at least in working with serverless apps in the production, that you might have everything green, everything in the operational side, LAMPs are working, everything is good. But then when you check your custom metrics for your like business level, like metrics, then you realize like, oh, why I was doing something like you're also working with videos. I was doing something like Netflix for cartoons, and it's like why there is like 1/4 of the views that we should get by this time. Like what is going on?
Yeah.
Like every day we have 100,000 views. Why now we have 10,000? Like there is something weird. Everything is green. But I should go and check.
Absolutely. So
those metrics help.
yes. So the type of metric and the specific metric, it's really related to your use case. So this is just an example. But if you're a developer and you're watching this, like I think it's up to you and your team to define what kind of information, which is not strictly related to the health of your system, it's important, or what would be something that deviates from the expected behavior of your service from like a business perspective. So in this case, it would be interesting to see, okay, if 100% out of like 1,000 submissions are all disagree, something is weird. It could even be used like for general, so it could be even sometimes used for like understanding, even when things are going well, like understanding the behavior. What is the stable behavior of your system and getting some insights even as a developer. So it's not like a analytics kind of like setup, but it still allows you as a developer to understand how your system is being used. Okay, so this is for metrics, and then you would have the trace. And as I mentioned, just by using the
And basically
Lambda,
one question on the metrics. So basically by doing metrics dot add metric is creating the custom metric.
So by using this log metrics, for instance, I'm saying in this case, in this line, I will create out of the box a metric that will tell me something about cold start. So is this a cold start or not? But yeah, it does.
Because you have a decision there, like that basically just metrics add metric creates a custom metric.
Here, sorry, I was looking at the So in here, what I'm storing is I was looking here. What I'm storing as a custom metric is the decision. So in here, my custom metric is a vote or downvote, and then I add a count like this. In this case, I add 1.
But my question is, no need to create infrastructure to create this metric. It just happens.
It just happens. So just by this one line for the metrics, that's done. And for the tracer also, I'm adding an annotation. So I mentioned the concept of traces, segments, and subsegments. In this case, I'm adding an annotation, which is the tracer version of a key value pair that allows me to filter the traces in my console to kind of find the traces that are relevant to my service or to what I need.
Yeah. In this case, you will be able to filter positive or negative decisions.
Yes, that's an example. So let me show you actually. I hope that I still have the session. Yes, I do. Yes. Okay. Okay, so I showed you a bit of the code base. I showed you a bit of my tagging strategy. Let me show you. So this is the Lambda function, the console. Let me show you a bit of the goods. What are the data points that I generated? So this is Cloudwatch Logs, where, for instance, let me open something. So this is an example of the data that I can see in my logs. So for instance, out of the just by using the Midi middleware for the logger that I mentioned in Jet Lambda context, I'm getting out of the box just by one line of code, the cold start, yes or not, the function I ran, which is also important and good for you to know. Function memory size, function name, information about the function, the request ID. This is also useful if you want to, this is generated by AWS, by the way. It's the unique identifier for the invocation. Other things like, okay, these I know, this is the log level, this is the log item where I log the event that was triggered Lambda. This is, I see the serverless voting app. This is the account ID, and this is the how do you call it, the
HTTP,
payload of the
API gateway.
Yes, exactly. So I get a bunch of stuff here. Let me see if I can get anything else. I think that's fine. So this is about logs. Let me show you the actually, let me open the metrics.
And the logs are quite cool when they're structured because you can use something is service lens and create interesting queries.
Yes. So let me show you the metrics. So that would appear, I don't have the tab here open, but let me find it to you. So here, all the metrics.
You have the namespace.
Sorry for these were tests. I use this account for everything, but the namespace that I want is this one, Octank, which I pretend it's the name of my company. And here I see some information. So for instance, here I have metrics that are related to I know, for instance, this is generated in the test environment. This is my account ID. This is the name of the service. And I see, for instance, that there's been one upvote and a downvote. For instance, here, one upvote, and one upvote and a downvote. So these are my custom metrics that are, and then I can use this in my dashboards. I can use this to trigger specific alerts that maybe would send me a Slack message. So you can use this information as it's more relevant to you. So this is about metrics. And then we have traces. So let me show you the service lens. So here I have my serverless floating app test, get videos, Lambda function. And in here, you can see that this is my Lambda function information that has a duration. So the Lambda duration was the 329 milliseconds. And I can see that here, so I get some info. So these are all the different subsegments, and it tells me information. It tells me how long did it take to perform an operation. In this case, the handler and the wrapper and so on. And another nice thing about this, so this is like the traces landing page. But another thing about this page that I like is that it allows you also to see the related logs and so on if you want. So it tells you, okay, this was not an error and so on. So it tells me something about my Lambda function and how long did it take to perform a certain operation. And for instance, status code and so on. Yeah. So to conclude, so this I was using the console. So you can use Cloudwatch as a service to query. So you can send your data points to Cloudwatch, like your logs, your metrics, and your traces. And then with Cloudwatch, you can also query that information and utilize those data points to create alarms that are supposed to be reactive. But so we outside of Cloudwatch, so Cloudwatch is one way in which you can query and visualize your monitoring data. You can also use potentially Amazon Managed Grafana, which is essentially uses Cloudwatch data points as a source of information. This is a dashboard that I created just to. It's not like a production ready dashboard, but in the goal of this dashboard, like I have a very high bar for dashboard. This is not the best dashboard I created, but to be patient with me. But the thing is, so what I wanted to show with this dashboard is essentially that you can use information about your AWS, your CloudWatch data points and then visualize them in Grafana, and you can see also custom metrics and logs and so on. So that's another way in which you can.
This is good for developers that are used to Grafana, because this is a very normal, common tool for everybody. So
so I think that's it by my side. Let me do. I will stop sharing my screen.
I've been asking questions all the time, so. Yes. So what about JavaScript developers? What they need to do, migrate to TypeScript?
Okay. So I think that in our industry, we tend to have people that are very strongly opinionated about a programming language. I am appreciative of TypeScript because it's a useful language and I see a lot of benefits by using TypeScript. However, you need to use what's best for your context, for your job. Sometimes JavaScript is the best tool, is the best language for your code base for a variety of reasons. And if developers are more comfortable or prefer to use JavaScript, they can use JavaScript. So let's say that you are a developer that uses JavaScript and then deploys JavaScript code to the Node.js runtime in Lambda. You can still use the AWS Lambda Powertools for TypeScript, because at the end, what we are doing in the end is transpiling code TypeScript into JavaScript. And then For if you're a JavaScript developer, you just import the JavaScript library. And then if you're a TypeScript developer, you have the additional developer experience, and you also have types that help enhance your experience and ideally help you also understand the documentation of this library better and how the library behaves. But long story short, doesn't matter if you're a JavaScript developer or a TypeScript developer, you can use the Lambda Powertools for TypeScript.
Because I imagine a lot of people by watching this are like, oh, I would love to migrate to TypeScript, but we have like 2 million lines of code already in JavaScript. Can I still use this thing?
It's a fair question, and you use it. You can use it.
So that will make a lot of people happy. And I think with that, I ask all my questions, but I will leave your social media in the description box. So if people have more questions, they can ping you directly there. Is that okay?
Yes. Happy to answer any question that you might have.
Good. So thank you very much for showing this demo, the code and everything that we mentioned today. It's also linked in the description box, so you can go and check it out. And with that, I thank you again for being here today.
Thanks to you. And again, it was an honor. And thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you for watching the video until the end. This was a long interview, but it was really good. The code and everything that Sarah shared is in the description box. All the videos I mentioned, they are there, so no need to panic. And just let me know if there is something you would like us to cover in the future, or you would like some more demos or things like that around this topic. And I see you in another episode of FooBar. Ciao, ciao!